afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever time you happen to be listening to Hell in a Hallway today with your host, Billy. I'm so glad that I'm having coffee, and as you can see, it's not in my usual mug. I tend to use mugs a lot, and I'm out of coffee, so I went to McDonald's to not only to get out and be out and about during this quarantine season, but also just to get me a cup of coffee because I've been drinking tea lately and it's just not doing it. So anyway, this is part 2 of Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, right? And this is really, this particular segment is on thoughts and feelings and who's in control of them, and what are you doing with them. So I want to be able to kind of speak to, before I talked about evaluating those particular thoughts, like checking for bias, checking your own personal filter. This time I'm going to run it through the concept of a car crash, right? And this is the way I explain it to my clients. As a clinician, I'm very story driven. And so I need pictures and analogies and stories to help drive home a point because they seem to do better, right? So sometimes I ask a person, all right, who was driving the car in that scenario? Were your feelings driving the car or were your thoughts driving the car? And they usually laugh, right? Because it's usually their feelings. And I said, your feelings have created a 15-car wreckage, right? Your feelings jump out the car. They leave the scene. They out. Your thoughts are in the back seat. They sleep. Thoughts, logic, they're taking a nap. They're not in the place with you. They're not there. So then the wreckage occurs. Thoughts show up and like, whoa, what happened? Feelings done left the scene. And there you are with the wreckage that your feelings has caused. See, it's so important that you don't let feelings always drive the car because they didn't go to driving school, And also, feelings like to drive the car fast in any direction. That's what they like to do. So we have to pay attention to who's driving the car, your thoughts or your feelings. So I'm just going to pick a couple of different cognitive distortions, which is a way of thinking, a distorted way of thinking, and we're going to talk about the feelings associated with those particular cognitive distortions, right? So for example, one example is jumping to conclusions. That's a cognitive distortion. That's a way of thinking. That's you saying, hey, I know what that person's thinking. I know. I have made a decision on what the conclusion of that situation is without any evidence. So as a clinician, I tend to ask people not just how is that ineffective, because that's an easy question. Most people can look hindsight and say, that doesn't make sense. I probably shouldn't jump to conclusions. But I usually ask people not only that, I ask them, how does it serve you? Why do you do it? That's what I tend to ask them. See, that's a harder question to answer. See, if you know the why, you can shift it. You have to know the why. So most of the times when it comes to jumping to conclusions, it actually helps them to alleviate anxiety. Yes. So if I can anticipate your thoughts, if I can anticipate your behaviors, I can react to that particular anticipation, despite the fact that I'm wrong, right? So I have the anxiety. I drive the car into a decision making that's ineffective. And then later people are coming and talking to me like saying, Billy, why did you do X, Y, Z? And then I say something like, well, I thought it was da 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 da. And they're like, where'd you get that from? And that's my favorite sentence. Where'd you get that from? And it's because my own anxiety allowed me to create a conclusion, and then I responded to that conclusion. The next one on my list is magnification. We do that a lot, right? We magnify situations. We tend to magnify the worst. See, we rarely magnify joy and great things. We tend to magnify the worst. And again, the question I ask people is, how does it serve you? Not just how is it ineffective. How does it serve you? And what do people say? It allows me to feel like I have control. So your issue is with control. And that's the place that we have to start, right? We have to start from that perspective, because if that's driving the car, so now you can't even see the positive in any circumstance, and you're responding heavily actually more heavily than you should, because now that situation, which probably have a severity, if we're scaling it from 1 to 10, let's say I have a severity of maybe 4 or 5, because you have magnified only the negative part, you have a reaction of 10. Your reaction and your circumstance should match as closely as possible. The next cognitive distortion that we'll evaluate really quickly is personalization. And that is indicating that everything that people say or do is a reaction to them. Here I am believing that, oh, you're doing that because of me. See, that's that phrase, taking it personal, kind of comes from. It's the idea of personalization. And then when I ask people yet again, why do you do that? How does it serve you? And they say, well, it's because I can change myself. And then if I change myself, I can change how they respond to me. And again, that makes people feel safe. All of these cognitive distortions are really about a lack of feeling safe, not being safe. Notice I said not being safe, feeling safe. And see, and there's no real evidence that any of those things are true, because when most people use those particular cognitive distortions, they don't bother to check them out to see if they're right. And so then they drive a car, feelings are in a car, 100 miles an hour, crash. And so they create all these circumstances. And then finally, when they come out of the cognitive distortion coma, right? Because anxiety is no longer driving the car, logic is in the back going, what the heck happened? If logic ever shows up. It is up to you to do the work to find out which cognitive distortion you're using. And guess what? I only mentioned 3. There are a whole bunch. So be prepared for more shows in the future about cognitive distortions. And like I said in that first video, make sure you reflect and introspect. That's how you deal with some of these cognitive distortions. Where did I get this from? What's my evidence for it? Evaluate it. Reflect, introspect, meaning look within. Check yourself out in the mirror, and sometimes just because it's not always pretty doesn't mean it can't be done. Doesn't mean it can't be fixed. We have to be willing to look at it so we can move forward. Thanks again for tuning in. I enjoyed this moment with you, having my McCafe coffee, and I'll see you next time. Until then, happy reflecting.